Control structures are constructs that allow you to control the flow of executions in a program. There is a number of these control structures in Java and other OOP languages. In particular, C, C++ share very similar syntax. Let's look at several types of control structures quickly. These structures enable you to make decisions, repeat blocks of code, and handle exceptional cases. The very first one is control statement. These are Boolean statements making use of what's called if else. Sometimes you can chain the whole block of code using if else and then if else, so on and so forth. Basically, you may execute a block of code if a specified condition is true. If else executes one block of code if the condition is true, and another block if the condition is false. By concatenating all of these conditions together allows you to create this chain of multiple conditions. Another type of control structure is what we call looping statements or loops. We'll look at for loop, while loops, and do while loops in a different video. Basically, they allow you to execute a block of code a specified number of times, or executing a block of them as long as the specified condition is true. There's also branching statements like switch case, where you specify the condition up front, and based on that condition, you'll branch your logic into specific block. You can make use of break and also continue keywords to either terminate the innermost loop or switch statement, or skip the current iteration of the innermost loop and continues with the next iterations. There's also a return statement as part of your branching statement. Return statement exits a method and optionally returns a value. We'll see all of this in a different video as well. In this video, we'll focus on conditional statements. Let's take a look at some of the examples and how syntax works. The conditional construct looks like this. Basically, you have an if and a pair of parentheses with a Boolean expression. Remember, a Boolean expression yields either true or false. If true, the set of statements are executed. If not, these set of statements will not be executed. For example, if we said radius is greater than equal to 0, assuming radius is an integer, then this block of code or statement, there are two statements. You can look at the number of semicolons here. Both of these are executed. If radius is less than 0, this entire block will be skipped. You can visualize this entire conditional one-way if as a decision tree, where depending on the condition or this Boolean expression leading to either true or false, you can go either true or false path. Notice you would need to encapsulate your entire statement inside the scope of this conditional statement with a pair of curly braces. Without this curly braces, for example, if I were to clear this and said, I'd like to remove this, in the absence of this pair of curly braces, this if conditional statement only applies to this block right here, which means the very first statement will be evaluated. And this entire system out will then be a different statement outside of your conditional. So this is a very important to understand. Sometimes people write these curly braces starting here. It doesn't matter. This is just a code format preference. Also remember, a conditional one-way if is not a statement. It is some sort of evaluation. You don't add a semicolon, for example, right here. This entire block of code will be evaluated. Your statement that is within this set of curly braces will be considered a different scope. We'll talk about scope in a different video. You also don't want to add semicolons here because that will render your entire conditional invalid from a syntactical standpoint. Let's look at some more examples. We'll look at some of the correct and incorrect way of constructing your conditional statement. Very first one, this is wrong because it is missing a pair of parentheses to bind your Boolean expression. The next examples are both correct. Like I said before, if you don't have a pair of curly braces to create the conditional scope, then the very first statement right after your if without this curly braces will be evaluated. Which means if you just only have one statement with the curly braces, they are equivalent to this. Let's look at some more examples. This is an if-else statement. An if-else statement executes one block of code if the condition is true, and another block if the condition is false. So this is a decision tree for the two-way if. As a best practice, you'll always include this scope, curly braces, regardless whether you're talking about the true or false conditions. If you have a condition that is true, then the statement following true will be evaluated. Otherwise, the logic will jump into the else block of code in this direction. As soon as either is evaluated because they're both statements, the flow of control exits your entire conditional, leading to the next line of code. Let's look at a concrete examples next. This is the radius example. Instead of using a one-way if, now we have two-way if using an else. If the radius is less than 0, this entire block will be evaluated. And notice that at the end of your if and else, you do not need to have a semicolon. You can consider this decision tree using either if and else with a curly braces to encapsulate the entire scope only. The actual evaluations happens with respect to these statements, depending on whether this Boolean expression is true or false. Additionally, you can also create chain conditionals by having something like if condition evaluation, else if conditional evaluations, and then else if again conditional evaluations, so on and so forth, with the very last one being else. As stated before, between each block of conditionals, you will want to use pair curly to enforce this scope. The reason why you have the last else is because remember, this entire decision tree, you want to make sure the entire 100% of them will be covered. This chain of multiple conditions with the very last else to conclude your if else. We'll look at if else if, this chained conditionals in the next video.